Welcome to the first ever The Daily Dawg GameWeek podcast. These GameWeek podcasts will be taking some aspect of looking at our opponent, looking ahead to the team, how we hope and wish they're going to play, what we expect, how we're being perceived either before or after the game or over the course of the season for possible contender for SEC title, national title, or whether or not we have to adjust those perspectives. This is just be an opportunity to focus in on all things building up to, leading up to the games, and then breaking it down and going over the games after, and then building back up to the next opponent in the next game. So, really appreciate you being here. I'm excited for these segments, and I look forward to bringing them to you each day during the season. But what I want to do now is let's talk about our opponent. So this week we're playing Marshall, the Thundering Herd from Huntington, West Virginia. Marshall is a school with an enrollment of just about 9,600 students. I do not know where Huntington, West Virginia is. I mean, it's West Virginia. I'm not sure there's that big a difference between one part and another. Um, Not to pick on poor West Virginia, but it is a rural and mountainous state. Um, Marshall plays in a stadium that seats 38,277 people. So, not maybe a little over a third of Sanford Stadium. Last year they had a great year. They went 10-3, 7-1 in the Sun Belt Conference, and they won the Sun Belt Conference. They played in the Sun Belt Conference championship game and won. Despite that, the fan base, which I think we've all heard of Marshall. We've heard of the tragic plane accident that happened many years ago and how they lost coaches and team members. And, they're a resilient and proud program for being a smaller school and often a team that can rise up and give some of the bigger teams trouble. And in fact, we played Marshall once in my fandom, I think, which the only other time we played them was back in '04. We won the game 13-3, and we were an 18-point favorite that day, and we only won by 10. And I remember it being a very frustrating game. I remember talking with I had people over to watch the game. We had a cookout, and people came over, big crowd, and we watched the game. Might have even been one of those games back in the day that was on pay-per-view, where it wasn't on ESPN and it wasn't on one of the regular televised games, but they made these games available through local media companies, local cable companies, where for something like 29 to 99 to $59 or whatever, you could buy the game and put it on. And it seemed kind of extravagant at the time. And so if you're going to do it, you certainly wanted to invite a bunch of people, and everybody didn't want to have to pay that kind of money. So obviously, people would group up and go to somebody's house to watch these games. So I remember the game in '04, and it was like I said, it was uh, you know, uh, a very frustrating game. 13-3 was definitely not something anybody wanted to see, and I remember standing around talking to everybody about it afterwards. So I don't remember how good that Marshall team was, but Marshall has been one of those smaller teams over the years that can be good, and they were really good last year. But I think it's going to be a different story this year. Their head coach, building on the success from last year's Sun Belt Championship, was hired away by Southern Miss, and about 30 or more players went into the portal and followed him to Southern Miss. I have pulled a lot of this information, by the way, and I highly recommend for the true stat geeks and junkies, and I can be that. I'll try not to bury you in that. But from time to time, I do think the stats can be telling. So a lot of this information I pulled from Phil Steele's catalog or information on 2025 football. I've been a Phil Steele fan for many years, and I've learned a ton from his books, which are just crammed in every little way possible with tiny little bits of information. And anyway, so I thumbed through here to bring a lot of this information forward so we can have a little perspective. You should be knowledgeable, know the team we're playing. Somebody will say, well, where's Marshall from? Or, I don't even know anything about Marshall. Well, if you've listened to this podcast, you'll at least know a little something about Marshall. You don't need to know everything about Marshall, but something about Marshall is reasonable to know. So, anyway, just so a lot of this information I have looked at ESPN archives from last year and Phil Steele's 2025 college football preview book, which I do buy every year and read through. So um, I did not read on Marshall until now. Time to look at this opponent and decide what's going to happen here. So anyway, in his summary, Phil still sort of quibbed. There was a little line in there that joking that Southern Miss may actually have more Marshall players on their roster than Marshall this year. So, and that seems to happen these days, right? That's the new world of NIL and transfer. Is if a team has success and another team wants to have success as well at these mid-level and smaller level schools, well, then they can just bring the entire team over. Vanderbilt basically imported a whole new team in from New Mexico State. Coach Clark Lee, saw Vanderbilt go to Auburn and beat Auburn at Auburn, and he suffered a 2-10 season, and he said, "Hey, I need some of that." So basically, he backed a moving truck up to New Mexico State and loaded up half their team and their coaches and brought them over to Vanderbilt, plugged them in, and next thing you know, all of a sudden Vanderbilt is a 7-6 team and the Alabama State champions after beating both Alabama and Auburn last year. So, um, whole new world out there. Marshall had a good year last year, but that has been exported over to Southern Miss. This is not about Southern Miss or getting too deep in the weeds on that. So who knows whether that's going to work and Southern Miss will be any good or not. But I think what it does mean is that Marshall has an all new coaching staff, and they had like three different guys that ran for 500 to 800 yards rushing, which is great. They had a productive quarterback. They had a pretty solid defense, and pretty much all of that is gone. So they're going to be starting over with a new coach, new coaching staff, new players. As best as I can tell, they got a couple piecemeal quarterbacks that have minimal experience. One guy who maybe started 10 or 12 games at Connecticut a couple of years ago, and another guy who maybe played sparingly as a backup at Syracuse. So, very little experience at quarterback, not as salty a defense as they probably had last year. And so they're probably not going to put up the same kind of fight they put up last year. And they did put up some fight. They played a couple teams that were instructive for us to look at last year. They played Ohio State um, in their third game of the year. They were a 39-point underdog, and they came in and got under the spread. They only lost by 35, but it was a 28-14 game at the half. So you can bet that there was a little grumbling at Ohio State watching Marshall be within two scores at the half. Um, Ohio State scored 21 unanswered in the third and fourth quarter to kind of make it look better. But it was not a great game for Ohio State, and Marshall put up a good fight. And Marshall came in as a 20-point underdog at Virginia Tech the week before that, and they managed to be within 16, 17 points. They came in 30. They lost 31-14. So so they were gritty last year. They won their conference and they played some bigger teams tough, but I don't think we're going to see that this year. So that gives us a little background on Marshall. So what do we think is going to happen in the game? Well, okay, let me go ahead and if you haven't heard it yet, let me be the first to just say um, Marshall's gonna lose. Georgia's going to win this game. We should win by double digits, and they're just going to be completely outclassed talent wise. So, and everybody knew that. So but this is good because I think that when you, um, well, different seasons have different value. I think we saw a couple of years ago when we had a very talented team coming off a championship year, and we started with some weak opponents. We had a run of several weak opponents, and it looked like the team kind of walked their way right into the beginning of the season. And there was a lot of grumbling, like, "Hey, what? Georgia's not kicking in gear. They don't look championship level here." And so we saw some slipping right away, of the perception of Georgia football because we weren't taking care of the lesser opponents. But that was a team where we knew what we had, and they, looked like a stacked team, and they looked like they should be able to keep the championship run going. And they didn't. They didn't turn in that performance initially. So, but then last year we started the game with, or the season with a game against Clemson, big rivalry game for Georgia, longtime Georgia fans, and a team that was, a legitimate. By the time the season was over, they established themselves as a playoff team. So there was one of our better wins, and we just demolished them. I mean, it wasn't, it started off slow and it was close early, but we just kept applying the pressure and applying the pressure. And Clemson was never able to do a thing offensively. And eventually, the Georgia defense wore them down, shut them down, and we started putting up points, and it was a runaway win. And I think when you go back a couple of years ago, we had Oregon on the schedule, and a lot of people were picking Oregon to come into Mercedes-Benz and surprise Georgia. But I think a lot of you remember that turned out into an utter blowout beyond anybody's expectations. So sometimes it's good when you have a loaded veteran team for them to be focused on a tough first game, I think, so that they really put in the effort in the fall practice and they really focus on those 15 practices or so, whatever they get, and then get ready for game week and they come out with their hair on fire. But this is a different team. This is a team where we've got a guy who's still relatively young at quarterback, who we expect to be playing in Gunnar Stockton. He's played a game and a half as a starter, basically. And of course, he wasn't the starter in the half game. He came in relief, but it was his game, and he took it over and won it. And then he started the playoff game against Notre Dame, and we're all frustrated about how that went. It was not a great game, but arguably Gunnar did a decent job. I mean, he had a good completion percentage. He threw for about 230 something yards, and he was generally productive. He didn't have a lot of big play. There was a lot of small plays, and but that's probably not him. That was probably the coaches keeping things a little tight into the vest, hoping that the defense would keep Notre Dame under wraps. And just going back to that for a minute, they did. It wasn't a terrible game plan. I mean, basically, Notre Dame scored their only two touchdowns of the game on a strip sack fumble that left them within 10 or 12 yards of the goal line, and they scored on the next play. And then they opened up the second half with a kick return for a touchdown, which we haven't seen that happen to us in forever. But those two breakdowns were the only two touchdowns in the game by Notre Dame. The defense otherwise did a great job of shutting Notre Dame down. So I think the coaches came into that game with a game plan of keeping things simple, ball control. Run game had not been great last year, so a bunch of short passes, a little mixed in a quarterback run here and there, keep the run game going. Let's keep it tight into the vest. They didn't think Notre Dame would be able to stretch out the game and score on them, and generally they weren't. And if it wasn't for a terrible turnover and kick return, then it might have been a different story. But shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? I mean, we know what happened, and there's no reversing it. But I'm just saying that I'm not sure when we look at that's instructive of what to expect from Gunnar Stockton. So what are we going to get, or what are we looking for? What do we expect here? Well, we expect this Georgia team to come out and overwhelm this Marshall team with talent. We expect Gunnar Stockton to get a chance to get comfortable. I mean, for the first time, every quarterback, when they play a full season and they go into a second season like Carson Beck did, every quarterback has played a mix of teams that you're ridiculously more talented than, teams you're generally more talented than, and teams that are kind of on level. And those games present different challenges. And when you go through 12, 15 games in the season, by the end of a season, you're pretty much a veteran. But Gunnar is not a veteran. I mean, he's been on the team a long time. He knows the team knows him. But and I'm sure he knows the playbook, and I'm sure he's well studied, but he has not really had the experience of being the guy and playing in a game like this, where he can just go out there with a lot of confidence and execute the playbook, execute the plays, pick out his weapons, and make things happen, and build that confidence and that routine and that sense of, hey, this is familiar. I know what I'm doing. I put on my cleats. I listen to this music. I go out and I run these plays, and I'm the starting quarterback. And so this is a great chance for him to get settled in and be that guy. And so I think we should be thankful. I don't know if we really wanted two of these games back to back with Marshall and Austin Peay in back to back weeks. Might have been nice to have a lesser conference game, something a little tougher to get us ready for the Tennessee road trip. Maybe like Kentucky or something like that. But in the second game, but we're going to have a pair of these games, and it's going to give everybody a chance to get together. And you know what? We got some new people. I mean, we're expecting a lot of transfers like Zachariah Branch and um, Colby Young is back after he was off the team last year with the domestic problem, but he's been cleared of that, and now he's back, and he didn't really get a chance to play. And so Gunner is the quarterback now, and the guys who've been here before, like Dylan Bell and Oscar Delp, and guys that we've been looking to see some big plays from, they got to get used to him, and then the new guys got to get used to Gunner and the whole team. So this is a great opportunity for that. So that's I think what our expectation is our combination of expectation and hopes are kind of the same here. Our expectation is that Georgia goes out and the defense and the offensive line and the defensive line hold the lines, and that Marshall makes no inroads on either side, and that Gunner has the time to go out there and pick apart the defense, execute the plays in the playbook that Bobo gives him, get to know his receivers and his playmakers, and let them make some plays and let everybody get some confidence. And hopefully he's out of the game either by halftime or third quarter. So we can see, I'd like to see three quarterbacks play in this game so that everybody gets a little bit of chance to get their feet wet. And of course, they got the same game coming up the week after that, basically. We'll talk a little bit. We'll look into Austin P and see what they're all about and whether or not they're going to pose at least more of a challenge or not. But haven't looked at that yet, so I can't say. But he, that's what we're looking for. That's what we expect, and that's what we want. So what we want to see is we want to see the team execute. We want to see the team execute at things they were not particularly good at last year. No drop passes or minimal drop passes, right? We want to see some yards after the catch, some explosive plays. I mean, if you go back and look a lot of last year, even when we did make catches, you didn't see a lot of run after the play. The kind of runs that you used to see Brock Bowers and Lad McConkey and even Roserme Jack Saint, catch the ball and then get another 10, 15 yards downfield. We didn't see a lot of that. We didn't see hardly any explosive runs. We saw some good runs here and there, but we didn't feel like there was the potential where any minute now a guy is going to break through it. If he busts through the line, he could go for 40 or all the way. So we'd like to see some guys break through the lines. We'd like to see the offensive line blow people off the ball and give those guys holes. We'd like to see the defensive line get pressure on the quarterback without having to run a lot of blitzes or fancy stack the box kind of things. And we don't want to see. I mean, everybody gains some yards, right? But we don't really want to see them consistently move the ball. We don't want to see them consistently pick up third downs. We want to we want to see I mean, I guess the trick is even when you're playing these lesser teams and your stats might get a little padded, but you want to see those stats. We want to see 50% or more third down completion. If we even have a lot of third downs, sometimes in games like this, you get a lot of first downs on first and second down. So maybe you run up 500 yards and 40 plus points, but you do it you only have 5 first downs that you had to convert or 8 first downs you had to try to convert in the entire game. You'll see a team go 4 of 8 on third down. Whereas when you play an SEC team, then third down may be something more like 4 out of 10. Or something like that. A lot more, or 15. You might even have 10 or 15 third down conversions you have to come up with. So, but we want to see them convert third down. We want to see them stop third down if those situations come up. We want to see them move the ball. And sure, it'd be great to see some big plays and rip off some. But we're actually hoping Marshall puts up enough of a fight that the Dogs have to run some offense and do a few things, not just throw the ball one pass and run for 60 yards and a score. That might actually be too little resistance to really tell us much. But either way, what do we want to do? What do we want to see? We want to see the Dogs come out. We want to see them play with some intensity, control the lines. We want to. I alluded to it just a second ago. I think benchmarks. We want to see them put 40 something on the board. We want to see 500 something yards on there. We'd like it to be a healthy yard per play average. We want to see a balance. We'd probably like to see over 200 yards rushing, over 200 yards passing. I'd like to see 3 quarterbacks in the game. Just a good celebration of Georgia football and the talent and what we can do. and start getting this team to gel and come together and get ready for bigger things down the road. So that's a little bit of a combination of both what we expect and what we want. And so the next thing I guess we would talk about is what's it all going to mean? What's it going to, what are we going to get out of this? And everybody knows, I think, when you play games like this, there's a limit to what you're going to get out of it. Basically, if you win big, everybody expected you to win big. If you win, but it's closer than the line or closer than the people expect. Let's say you only win by 21 points, 18 points, something like that. People are going to say, "Oh, well, gosh." They're gonna you might even lose ground in the rankings. The people who do their rankings, both in the coaches poll and the AP poll, might take notice. And when you're further down in the poll and you're less high profile, you might can get away with a sloppy win. And if you were ranked 17th, you might still be ranked 17th the next week. But when you're ranked fifth, you're in the top five. They're going to run the highlights. They're going to talk about it. And if you eked out a 17-point win in a game you should have been a 40-point winner, then you're going to probably see some loss of perception. So we certainly don't want that to happen. But again, what does it mean? And the answer is nothing really. I mean, you're not gonna make new friends. You're not gonna win people over. People who are skeptics. Look, we're not ranked number one. We have one first place vote in the AP poll. You don't find many prognosticators and writers and experts who are picking Georgia to win the SEC, picking Georgia to win the national championship. We'll talk about this in another segment, another place. But what is the perception of Georgia football? Where are we right now? But you don't. The general idea is that we're fifth. Some people, one or two people think we could be a contender. Most people think we will make the playoff. It seems sort of universally, if you look at anybody who's laid it out already, they have us as a fifth seed. Some people think we'll advance a round or two and maybe fall in the semifinals or maybe even the championship, but nobody's really picking us as either SEC champion or national champion. So this game, we could win it 100-0, and it's not going to change the perception of that. I mean, you might have a few people say, "Oh, well, look, maybe Gunner's better than we thought," but everybody's going to, look at it with a grain of salt because it's Marshall and they're not a great team, and Georgia should win this game by a lot. So, so there's very little you can gain. You can lose from it, and what does it mean in this era in the playoff world? It means almost nothing because you have so many opportunities now. A 9-3 SEC team and a team like Georgia, it can't be any 9-3, but if it's the right 9-3, then you might still be a playoff team. 10-2, you're almost assuredly a playoff team. And you look up and down our schedule this year, and this is yet another segment we'll get to, but just as a quick hitter, you look up and down our schedule, and 10-2 is very believable. Even with the question marks we have. 9-3 is probably in play, and it's hard to imagine anything worse than that. And certainly, like any year, I mean, things could come out just right, and we could be 12-0 and going into the SEC championship game again. So we'll get to that in a different place, but in this context, we're talking about that in terms of what can we get from this game, what will be the national perspective when and if we do come out and hit those objectives, hold Marshall to, single digits or teens, put 40 something on the board, win by more than 30 points, have 500 or more, maybe 600 yards of offense, good yard per play, balance 200 yards plus rushing, 200 yards plus passing, play 3 quarterbacks, play 5 running backs, get a slew of wide receivers and tight end in the game. Those are all the things we want to see. And even if we do all that, it's not going to accomplish much. I mentioned Marshall played Ohio State kind of tough last year. They lost 49-14. It looked the same on paper. I looked at the stats. I pulled them up on ESPN from last year's game, and Ohio State ended up with about 556 yards of offense or something like that to about 280 for Marshall. They ran the ball pretty well. They threw the ball pretty well. There was, I mean, on paper, it looked like a pretty convincing win, but That's the thing about playing these teams. They're going to look pretty decent on paper no matter what you do. So um, the last thing I think in this segment that I want to encourage us as Georgia fans to think about and look at is that this is a new opportunity to kind of have some excitement and in the unknown. You know, when you win back-to-back national champions and you have the kind of loaded and stacked rosters that we have and have had and still have, you know, the idea is that you're right there as one of the top contenders. And this year, again, you know, we the last 2, 3, 4 years we've been, you know, a favorite to win the SEC or the national championship. This year we're not, but we're right there at the bottom of the people that are. And I don't think there is the kind of clear cut favorites. Every team has some flaws right now. Ohio State, Texas, um, you know, are not obvious championship merit teams. There's a lot of look at Penn State, and we'll come to that at another point too. But Penn State has the look of the last two teams to win the national championship. And we may have already seen a shifting, and this will preview some things we'll talk about later too. There may already be a shifting of how a championship team is built. I mean, Alabama and Georgia kind of used the same model and won a whole bunch of championships back to back in the SEC and national championships. And even LSU's really great year with Joe Burrow was very similar, which is just stockpiling overwhelming talent and just overwhelming people with talent. And um, and while Georgia is still Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Texas. These are all among the 4 or 5 most talented teams in the country. And that's why we're ranked number 5. That's why we're still in that conversation. And any expert would look at it and say, look, you can't count Georgia out because, you know, if you're trying to grade what roster is the most talented roster, and talent means a lot, right? I mean, if I don't know that it means everything, but it means a lot. And um, so when you look at the roster, um, the talent is there. The talent level, if you just created a metric for it and say, here's the talent level at Georgia, here's the talent level at Texas, Ohio State, um, you know, Alabama, even, who's even ranked further down there, you know, but that talent level is there, but there's question marks, and there's question marks on all those teams. Ohio State, but Ohio State and Michigan. What I was heading towards was to say Ohio State and Michigan, the last two back-to-back national championships teams, were a little bit different than the two Georgia championship teams that preceded them, and Alabama teams that won before that. These were teams where they were able to convince a group of potential NFL guys to stay. Some of that convincing was done by raising a lot of money to make the choice a little easier, so they weren't giving up that much in terms, if anything. In some cases, maybe they're made more than they might have made depending on their draft status. So it was financially a good deal for a lot of these guys to stick around. And so, you know, they had veteran. It's almost the old school way. When I was much younger, in my early days or back when I was in school, that's kind of how championship teams. You didn't win championships the way Nick Saban stockpiled them, you know, every other year or a couple of years in a row, or the way we did, you know, a couple of years in a row. Once in a while, you saw a team did that. The Nebraska team in the '90s, Florida did it. You know, so there was a couple teams that got a couple championships in short periods of time, but a lot of times what used to be the championship was to assemble a certain amount of talent, work it through a level of experience, get those right pieces, and just that magic season where you get the right breaks and it all comes together. And a veteran team with talent would come together, win a championship, and then, of course, they'd all go pro or, you know, lose run out of eligibility, and then boom, that team would go back to being, you know, a rebuilding team the next year. And Nick Saban changed all that. Rebuilding became no longer acceptable, just reloading, right? And Georgia followed in those footsteps. But Ohio State and Michigan are kind of back in that older model. They were able to get a veteran roster to stick around and give it one more shot and pay them a lot of money. And they did it, and it worked for Michigan. And then all those guys went pro. And of course, Harbaugh left. But a lot of what happened is the guys who were key and instrumental in making that team a champion were gone. and they didn't have that kind of stockpiled talent behind them, so they became a fairly mediocre team the next year. Ohio State is probably not going to become a mediocre team because their assemblage of talent is much higher level than Michigan's was, but they did accomplish the same thing. They were able to keep a lot of veteran guys around, and some key contributors on the defense, the front seven, and their running backs, and one of their wide receivers. And a lot of these guys were able to stick around and make a run, and they did. And those guys are gone. They had 14 guys drafted, and so they still, like us, like Texas, like Alabama, they still have a tremendous amount of talent, but but they got a lot of questions, and we got a lot of questions. You know, our defense didn't play up to Georgia standards last year. We allowed runs that we hadn't seen anybody put up against us in a long time. Just people running right up the middle, not for huge gains most of the time, but first down yardage. You know, I mean, 5, 6 yards on first down, 8 yards on first down, and then pick up the first down after that. And so that was hard to watch. It dragged games out. It made games slower. It gave our offense less chances. So all of a sudden, we had less opportunities to put up more points, and the offense wasn't as consistent. And they also didn't put up as many points, but they also had a little less opportunity thanks to a defense that was keeping the other team's offense on the field a little bit longer. So that's that complementary football that Kirby likes to talk about, and it made a big difference. So we didn't play up to that standard. And while we still have as much talent on the field as just about anybody, we still got a lot of questions. Can the defensive front be stronger this year, despite the fact that we lost a bunch of guys? So we're in a weird position where we lost some key people, several key people from the defensive front seven, and there's not necessarily that obvious bunch of guys behind him who are like, well, this guy's even better, honestly. I mean, there's a lot of unproven behind them. So we weren't as good as we had been in the previous couple of years last year, and we don't even have those guys back. So that creates some real questions. I mean, everybody will tell you universally, look, defense is stacked with talent, but the front seven's going to be a question mark. So especially on the pass rush too, we lost, 2 guys who were drafted in the first round as edge rushers. So we were not awesome. We were mid-pack, upper third or whatever of pass rush. And I think when you think about the games last year, we rushed the quarterback when we needed to, like think Texas, right? But we were not a dominant pass rush team. And now, those 2 guys are gone. And a guy named Gabe Harris, who looked like maybe the next guy coming up, transferred to Missouri. So I think Missouri. But yeah, so again, we're not really sure who those next guys are. We're going to have to see some guys emerge. Obviously, there's a lot of questions about Gunner. We've already talked about that. We'll talk about that more. But and there's a lot of belief that we have significantly upgraded our wide receiver room, and that our tight ends were always super talented. So people generally believe in our receiving core, tight ends and wide receivers. But the honest truth is, it's also a prove it group of people. So we got a lot of prove it out there, and that's where people have us, and that's why we're down. So they say, look, Georgia's as talented as any team in the country, so they could win the national championship or play for it. But at the same time, they got question marks at quarterback, defensive front, receiving core. And by the way, running game was also not up to standard. So all of a sudden you just say, well, gosh, that's kind of everybody. If we got questions all those places, where do we not have questions? Well, our kicking game is really solid, with the exception of that, Thorson, our all-world punter, may not be ready to start the season. So, but I think we'll be fine there. We don't have to worry about that too much. And on place kicking, we're solid. So again, it's not to be alarmist and say we got problems in all those areas. It's just, it's not as obvious that we're proving all those areas. Going back to Ohio State, they're in the same boat. They don't have the same defensive front that they had before. They lost one of their wide receivers. They lost their running back. Their quarterback was a one-year guy. I honestly, with Will Howard, never believed that he was going to lead them to a championship, but he is a good example of what Gunner could be for us. If the rest of the team can come together and play strong, I still don't think Will Howard is a guy who, I mean, they, in some cases, they probably won the national championship in spite of him. I mean, I think he played really well in the playoffs, but during the regular season, he did not seem to be the guy who could deliver in the clutch in the big games, a la the Oregon game and certainly the Michigan game. And he had some pedestrian numbers in some other games. But again, it shows you if the rest of the team can come together, and we've had that team before too. You don't have to have a number one draft pick quarterback to win the championship. So obviously we didn't have that the two times we did. As great as Stetson Bennett played, and as much as he did make a Heisman, um, invite, uh, he just barely got drafted, and of course has had some personal issues and hasn't been able to get on the field in the pros. But it's always going to be a long shot for him because I mean, they took him for pedigree and because he's a winner more than anything that jumps out on paper. I mean, he was doubted his whole time at Georgia, and he's continued to be doubted. But point being is, even Stetson Bennett, as wonderfully as he played, was never what you would look at and say, oh, that guy is clearly the top guy quarterback. So I've wandered all over the farm a little bit here, but the point I'm getting at is to say that look, it's a new team, and we don't know what's going to happen. And I think for once we should revel in that a little bit. We should. I'll admit that it almost got a little boring. Games like this had very little intrigue. Even SEC games. I mean, even if we played South Carolina or Kentucky, I mean, our schedule's been jumping around a little bit, but I just didn't come into games the last 3, 4 years with anything but the teams that really had maybe close to us talent. We had such an overwhelming level of talent that, even the Florida game. I mean, I always had a little bit of nervousness these last few years. Well, it's Florida. I mean, we've seen crazy stuff happen, right? But the truth is, their talent level was so far below where ours was, and not just, and they were still a pretty good team, but that's just how high our talent level was, and and I just don't think we're going to see that anymore. What I was saying before, Michigan, Ohio State, they assembled kind of a veteran one-shot team, and then they fell back. Michigan fell back. They're trying to get back up. Ohio State still has a lot of talent, like us, across the board, but a ton of question marks. New quarterback, but they still have the safety Caleb Downs and the wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. But either way, they probably have the best offensive and defensive players in the country in those two guys, as everybody has been prone to say. And but one guy on offense, one guy on defense doesn't make a championship. And honestly, as good as Caleb Downs is, there's a reason that safeties, rarely get drafted super high compared to, say, pass rushers and D linemen and stuff like that off defense, and even linebackers, is because it's very hard for a safety to change a game. Safety can save a game, but they can't change a game. So Caleb Downs may be the best overall defensive player talent-wise in all of college football, but he can't change the Ohio State defense on his own. And same thing at wide receiver. You can have the best wide receiver that ever lived, but somebody's got to throw him the ball, and somebody's got to have enough time to get the ball to him. So if you have a terrible offensive line and an inaccurate quarterback, the world's greatest wide receiver will make some astounding plays once in a while, but a lot less often than they will, if you have those other pieces. So, and Texas, Arch Manning is obviously got all the hype, but he hasn't started very many more games than Gunnar Stockton. And when we saw him come into the game against Georgia, he did not strike me as a guy who was ready to take apart elite defenses. I'm sure he's improved a lot in the same way we're hoping Gunnar's improved a lot. And I expect him to be really good, honestly. But I'm just saying, it's still a question mark despite the lock that everybody says it is. And Texas lost a lot of talent. They lost some of their top defensive guys. They do look like they have those next guys coming up behind them on pass rush and defensive line. But and they've got back their running backs, but they lost their offensive line. They lost a lot of guys on offensive line. So, and their offensive line, as good as they were, and as much as they had some high draft pick guys there, at least one, they struggled against us. So questions out there. So what am I getting at? My main point here in this segment is to say, hey, we should have a little bit of excitement about trying to just see what kind of team we have. And we're not going to learn a ton about that in this week or next week. Um, and so we might be surprised to find out what we actually do or don't have when we get to the third game against Tennessee on the road. But that's exciting. I mean, I know less about what I think is going to happen in that Tennessee game um, than I've known about a Tennessee game in a long time. Now, Tennessee is probably taking a big step back. So it's probably a help to us, if you're looking at schedule and winning, that they'll be a top 25 team, um, but not probably as potent as they were. I mean, just a quick word on them. They lost Nico. I won't even try and say his last name. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard the story and know the story that he tried to be an NIL holdout, and Tennessee appropriately said no, thank you. He was just pretty good anyway. He really probably wasn't worth the money they were already paying him, so holding out for more seemed a little extreme. But and we don't really know what UCLA paid to get him to come there, but probably less than he was making at Tennessee to begin with. But he was not spectacular, although he was young. I mean, and I think he would have grown into the role. But he didn't light the world on fire. And what made Tennessee a playoff team last year was an incredibly good defense out of nowhere. Tennessee had struggled in defense for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden came out with a really strong unit last year. Some veteran guys, most of them are gone now. And then they had like a 2,000-yard rusher who ate up yards and complemented their passing game, their gimmicky passing game. So this year, Tennessee is, got a couple guys healthy at wide receiver. I don't know all the details, but, they're starting with a new quarterback, and I have no idea, what kind of talent he has for their gimmick offense. And but they don't have the running back, and they don't have that defense anymore. So, and they were, a playoff team last year, but they did not look super competitive against us. They were not competitive at all against Ohio State, and they're not going to be that good this year. So we might not be as good this year. So still, when you look ahead to that third game, we'll get there. We got a couple weeks to get to that and really break it down. But at this moment, I can look at it for the first time and say, hey, I don't know. We could go to Tennessee and lose. I never thought we would lose to Tennessee last year. I mean, I just, for a lot of different reasons, I looked at the matchups, the team on paper, what we had, what they had, and it just, I mean, it just did not look like a favorable matchup for them. Looked like a good matchup for us. I'm not surprised that we were able to come out and dominate that game again, as we've been able to do for a while with Tennessee. And so we'll go to Knoxville on the third week of the season as a much more talented team, but with a lot of questions, and they'll come in with a lot of questions, and both teams might surprise. But we should revel in that excitement, and we should look forward to that game and these next couple games, and really, wondering, not sitting with expectation that hey, this has to be a championship team or bust. We should have excitement about, can this be a championship team? Could we win the SEC? Could we play for the national championship, make the playoff, make a run in the playoff? And that should be exciting, and it should be a fun thing to wonder and watch, and each week come back and see and judge, how are we doing? How are we coming on that? What is this team? How's the team coming together? Does it look like it's coming together for good, or not as good for that? So I I kind of miss sometimes the excitement of getting up on a Saturday and having a little flutter in my stomach and going, man, I hope we win today. I mean, what if we fumble the ball three times and Tennessee wins? I mean, that hasn't happened to us in a long time, but I can remember a couple games, even after we righted the ship on the Tennessee series, where there was one game in particular. I have to go back and look up which year it was, but I remember we lost at home, I think 1915, and was the score. And we were supposed to win that game, and it should have been a championship season. And that game ruined what might have been. I have to go back and look at all the details and say, did it really ruin a championship season? But it was it was a sign that that team wasn't ready to ascend. They let a lesser Tennessee team beat them. They made some mistakes. The game got away from them, and Tennessee won the game. And I used to wake up on a Saturday and wonder or worry if that was going to happen. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I haven't really wondered that much. I mean, yes, when we come to an Alabama game or when we came to the Texas game last year, yeah, because again, when we played Ohio State in the playoffs a couple of years ago, yeah, these are teams that had the talent to go toe to toe with us. So they could have won. But you know, they didn't. So, and so when we went through that streak and were able to beat those teams consistently, and not have those missteps, those, we haven't had, even with the team losing 3 games last year, 2 in the regular season. You lost to an Alabama team that was, didn't make the playoffs, but had the talent. Again, the talent base was there. They could have been a playoff team. They could have been a contender. And Ole Miss, which also missed the playoff, uh, but they also had the talent. I mean, that was a really talented team. That team was built to make a run for the playoff, and had they not lost the Florida game, they would have made the playoff, and they could have been a threat, just like Ohio State. They could have caught fire, and you never know. They were legitimately talented enough to be a threat, and so I'm not trying to make excuses for our loss to them, but and that was our first, like double digit blowout loss in a while. But that was not a stumble. That was not a game where we came out and stubbed our toe and got our nose bloody when we fell down and looked foolish. Because if you saw what that Ole Miss team was, there was nothing embarrassing about losing to that team on the road. And especially at that point in the season, the schedule we'd played, the way we'd already played at Alabama, we'd already played at Texas, and I think we'd already played at Texas. I had to go back and look at that. But yeah, so I mean, it was, we were tired. We were a tired team. We'd done a lot. And, it wasn't surprising um, that we weren't able to push through that. I mean, it didn't surprise me, but I guess it's not really, the point is not whether it was so surprising. The point is, even though we lost by double digits, and that was our worst loss in a long time, it's not like all the way back to the last time we lost a home game, uh, which is another thing to look forward to, by the way, and celebrate. As we will should tack on another win to the home winning streak, which continues to grow. And so we're looking ahead to that Alabama game in the fifth week after we get the early off week, and then we come back. If we can win that Alabama game, then we could really see this home winning streak grow into something special. We'll talk about that in another segment, another place. But that's another thing to look forward to and to celebrate and remember and say, look, we still have the nation's longest home win streak going, and it's growing to be a win streak that can be notable in the record books. We have a top 5 start to the season, and those matter. And you're looking at the history of the program. And so, our team's going to take the field. They're going to play football. We're going to see some new guys playing in some new positions, and we're going to have some enthusiasm and some excitement about seeing really what we got out there. And so that's Marshall. That's what to expect. That's what we want. That's what it's going to mean. And that's a little perspective on, that we should have some fun and start this season realizing that we might have a little bit of the butterflies again this season. Some of these games that have not really been in question, even against really good teams, even against rival teams like Tennessee, Auburn, and Florida the last 4 or 5 years, these games could be in question this year. And so maybe when you wake up on Saturday, you don't just mail it in as a fan knowing that, hey, we got this. And sometimes there's a little excitement in that. It's just like the team needs to earn it again to get back on top. Maybe it's time for us to earn it a little bit as fans. Have that excitement, have that enthusiasm, and be ready to, uh, just see what, have some wonder about what's going to happen. So, listen, this is the Daily Dog. This is our game week breakdown and look ahead to Marshall. Like I said, we've taken a look at the opponent. We've gone over what we expect, what we want, and so We will have a more specific breakdown and pregame prediction as we get to around Friday, probably. And we'll have some other segments. The next thing I think we want to do is we'll dig a little deeper in the next game week look at what's the state of the team right now coming into the season, and where are we at week one, and where are our chief competitors? What's the SEC look like? What's the national picture look like? Where do we stack up, and what are people thinking, saying about us? What's the national media perspective? What's the local media perspective? So we'll look forward to talking about that next time around. But for today, I hope this gives you some good thoughts, get you ready for Marshall, get you a little bit more on top of who Marshall is and what's going on, and what we're looking for and what we expect to happen here on Saturday. So you can kick back now and get ready to tailgate, watch the game, enjoy it, take it in any way you're going to, and just really celebrate and be excited that college football is back and Georgia football is back. So, as always, go Dogs.